Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought he'd notice her, until the moment she wished he hadn't. The morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows of Levine Events & Co., casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors of the 52nd floor. Jordana Barry adjusted the silver bracelet on her wrist, a small ritual that helped calm her nerves before another demanding day in Manhattan's most exclusive event planning empire. At 29, Jordana possessed a quiet elegance that spoke louder than any designer label. Her rich mahogany skin glowed under the office lighting, and her natural hair was styled in a sophisticated low bun that perfectly framed her delicate features. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream silk blouse, her style understated yet polished, exactly what was expected of someone who worked behind the scenes for New York's elite. "Good morning, Jordana," called out Melissa, one of the senior coordinators, as she hurried past with an armload of fabric samples. The Hartwell Gala samples arrived early. "Mr. Levine wants them reviewed before 9. Jordana nodded, already mentally organizing her morning. She had been Chad Levine's events assistant for 3 years, and in that time she had learned to anticipate his every professional need. The man was precision incarnate, every meeting scheduled to the minute, every detail scrutinized, every expectation impossibly high. She made her way to the conference room, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. As she arranged the fabric swatches and floral arrangements on the massive oak table, she caught a glimpse of herself in the room's floor-to-ceiling mirror. Sometimes she wondered if she was too invisible in this world of powerful personalities and commanding presences. The elevator chimed, and Jordana's pulse quickened slightly. Even after 3 years, Chad Levine's arrival still commanded attention from everyone on the floor. She heard his voice before she saw him, that distinctive low tone that could silence a room or close a $1-million deal with equal ease. "The Morrison account needs to be restructured by Thursday," he was saying to his senior partner Oliver, "and I want those quarterly projections on my desk before lunch." Chad Levine stepped into view, and Jordana felt that familiar flutter in her chest that she'd learned to ignore. At 38, he was devastatingly handsome, in a way that seemed almost engineered for success. Tall and broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he wore his charcoal Tom Ford suit like armor. Everything about him screamed power, control, and untouchable sophistication. He entered the conference room with purpose, barely glancing in her direction. "Ms. Barry," he acknowledged with a curt nod, his attention immediately shifting to the presentation materials. "Good morning, Mr. Levine," she replied, stepping aside to give him space. "I've arranged the options according to your preferences. Classic elegance with modern touches." For the next 20 minutes, Chad reviewed each element with surgical precision. He questioned color palettes, scrutinized vendor contracts, and made decisions with the swift efficiency that had built his empire. Jordana took notes, offered suggestions when asked, and marveled at how his mind worked, always 3 steps ahead, always calculating the perfect outcome. "The champagne selection for the toast?" he asked, not looking up from the catering proposal. "Dom Perignon 2010 as requested. The sommelier confirmed availability for 300 guests." "Good." He closed the folder and finally looked at her directly. For a moment, those intense blue eyes seemed to see her, really see her, and Jordana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Efficient as always, Ms. Barry." The compliment was simple, professional, but something in his tone made her heart skip. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent call and the moment dissolved. "Levine speaking," he answered, already moving toward his corner office. "What do you mean the senator's availability changed?" And just like that, he was gone, leaving Jordana alone with the lingering scent of his cologne and the strange sensation that something had shifted in those few seconds of eye contact. The rest of the morning passed in its usual controlled chaos. Jordana coordinated with vendors, managed guest lists, and solved the 1,000 small problems that could derail a high-profile event. During her lunch break, she sat in the small employee kitchen eating a homemade salad while scrolling through her phone. "Girl, you need to get out more," her best friend Keisha had texted earlier. "When's the last time you went on a real date?" Jordana smiled, typing back, "Define real date. Does dinner with quarterly reports count?" She was so absorbed in her phone that she didn't notice Chad enter the kitchen until he cleared his throat. Startled, she looked up to find him standing by the coffee machine, looking oddly out of place in the modest break room. "Mr. Levine," she said, quickly closing her phone, "I didn't expect to see you here." "The machine in my office is broken," he explained, though something in his expression suggested that wasn't the whole truth. "Oliver mentioned you make excellent coffee." Jordana felt a flutter of pride. "It's just a matter of getting the ratio right. My grandmother taught me that coffee should be strong enough to wake the dead, but smooth enough to drink slowly." To her surprise, Chad smiled. Not his polished business smile, but something genuine and unexpectedly warm. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Jordana said softly, standing to help him with the machine. "She used to say that the way someone makes coffee tells you everything about their character." As she guided him through the process, their hands accidentally brushed when he reached for the sugar. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent an electric shock up Jordana's arm. She stepped back quickly, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Careful," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's hot." Chad's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. "I'll remember that," he said quietly, and Jordana wasn't entirely sure they were still talking about coffee. The moment was interrupted by Oliver's arrival. "Chad, there you are. The Hartwell client is here early for the 3 o'clock. Reality crashed back, and Chad's professional mask slipped seamlessly into place. "Of course, Ms. Barry. Thank you for the coffee lesson." As he left with Oliver, Jordana remained by the coffee machine, her heart racing. She told herself it was nothing, just a brief, polite interaction between employer and employee, but deep down, she knew something had changed. That evening, as she gathered her things to leave, Jordana noticed a small note on her desk. In Chad's precise handwriting, it read, "The coffee was perfect. Thank you. CL." She stared at the note for a long moment, then carefully folded it and slipped it into her purse. As she waited for the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors and saw something she hadn't noticed before, a small secret smile playing at the corners of her lips. The elevator arrived, and as the doors closed, Jordana had no idea that on the 52nd floor, Chad Levine was standing at his window, watching her leave and wondering why a simple conversation about coffee had left him thinking about his assistant in ways that could change everything. And in that moment, neither of them realized that tomorrow would bring a conversation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the invisible lines between them. Sometimes the most dangerous conversations happen in broad daylight, surrounded by people who see nothing at all. The next day, the Hartwell Gala preparations had transformed the office into organized chaos. Jordana arrived early as usual, but found herself lingering longer than necessary at her reflection in the lobby's mirror. She'd chosen a deep emerald blouse that brought out the warm undertones of her skin, and her hair was styled in loose curls that framed her face softly. Professional, she told herself. Always professional. The event floor buzzed with activity. Vendors rolled in towering floral arrangements, caterers conducted taste tests in the conference room, and lighting technicians adjusted spotlights that would transform the grand ballroom at the plaza into a winter wonderland. Jordana moved through it all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, her tablet in hand, checking and rechecking every detail. "Jordana, honey, these centerpieces are gorgeous," gushed Felicia, the lead florist, as she arranged white orchids and silver branches. "Mr. Levine has exquisite taste." "Actually, those were my suggestion," Jordana said with a modest smile. "Mr. Levine approved them." "Well, sugar, you've got an eye for elegance. These are going to photograph beautifully." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Chad appeared in the doorway. Today he wore a navy suit that seemed tailored to perfection, and Jordana noticed he'd skipped his usual tie, a small rebellion that somehow made him look even more approachable. "Ms. Barry," he said, surveying the controlled chaos around them. "Status report?" "Everything's on schedule," she replied, consulting her tablet. "The linens arrived this morning. The musicians will sound check at 2, and the caterers are finalizing the appetizer presentation in Conference Room B. And the champagne for the toast? Chilled and ready. The sommelier will be on site by 6 to oversee service." Chad nodded, but instead of moving on to his next appointment, he lingered. "Walk me through the timeline once more." It was an unusual request. Chad rarely needed things repeated, but Jordana obliged, leading him through the space as she outlined the evening's schedule. As they talked, she became acutely aware of how he listened to her. Really listened, his attention focused entirely on her words. "The senator's speech is scheduled for 8:15, followed immediately by your toast," she explained, stopping near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "Then dancing until midnight. And you'll be there to coordinate?" The question seemed casual, but something in his tone made her look up at him curiously. Of course. I always oversee our events. Good. He paused, then added more quietly, I'd hate for anything to go wrong. Their eyes met, and Jordana felt that familiar flutter in her chest. Before she could analyze the moment further, Oliver's voice cut through the space. Chad, the Hartwell patriarch wants to discuss the seating arrangement. Apparently there's some family drama we need to navigate. Chad's professional mask slipped back into place so quickly that Jordana wondered if she'd imagined the softness in his expression. Of course there is, he muttered. Lead the way. As they headed toward Oliver, Chad glanced back at Jordana. Miss Barry, join us. You know these people better than anyone. The next hour was spent diplomatically rearranging table assignments to avoid putting feuding relatives within sight of each other. Jordana impressed herself with her diplomatic solutions, and she noticed Chad watching her with something that looked suspiciously like pride. Brilliant, he said, when she suggested moving the senator's ex-wife to the opposite side of the ballroom. How did you know about their history? I listen, Jordana said simply. People tell assistants things they'd never tell the boss. Remind me to be more careful around you, Chad said with a slight smile that made her pulse quicken. Later that afternoon, Jordana was in the supply closet, retrieving backup tablecloths, when she heard voices in the hallway outside. I'm telling you, something's different about the boss lately. She recognized Melissa's voice. He's been, I don't know, more human? Please, scoffed another voice. Jennifer from accounting. Chad Levine doesn't do human. The man's made of marble and ambition. But have you seen how he looks at ladies? Chad's voice cut through their gossip like a blade. Don't you have work to do? Footsteps scattered quickly, and Jordana found herself holding her breath in the closet, praying he would move on. Instead, she heard his footsteps approach. Miss Barry? His voice was softer now, questioning. I know you're in there. Mortified, Jordana emerged from the closet, her arms full of pristine white linens. Mr. Levine, I was just hiding from office gossip? His eyes held a hint of amusement. I don't blame you. I wasn't hiding, she protested, though her heated cheeks suggested otherwise. I needed backup tablecloths. Chad stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly intoxicating. Jordana, he said, using her first name in a way that made her heart skip. Can I ask you something? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Do you think I'm made of marble? The question was so unexpected that Jordana let out a small laugh. I think, she said carefully, that marble can be quite beautiful when it's shaped by the right hands. Chad's expression shifted, becoming more intense. And if it's not shaped by the right hands, then it remains cold and untouchable forever. The silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. Jordana was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way his eyes seemed to be memorizing her face. Mr. Levine. Chad? He corrected softly. When we're alone, call me Chad. The request felt dangerously intimate, like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Chad, she repeated, testing the name on her lips. We should probably, he agreed, but neither of them moved. The spell was broken by Jordana's phone buzzing urgently. She glanced at it and sighed. The musicians are here early. I need to coordinate the sound check. Of course. Chad stepped back, creating professional distance once again. Ms. Barry, about tonight. Make sure you take time to enjoy the event. You've earned it. As he walked away, Jordana leaned against the supply closet door, her heart racing. She touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his name there, and wondered if she was reading too much into every interaction. That evening, as she put the finishing touches on her makeup in the office bathroom, Keisha called. So how's the fancy gala prep going? Her best friend asked. Please tell me you're wearing something stunning and not your usual invisible assistant black. Jordana looked at herself in the mirror. She'd chosen a deep burgundy dress, professional enough for work, but with a subtle elegance that made her feel beautiful. I'm wearing burgundy. Oh, look at you stepping out. Anyone special going to see you in this burgundy dress? It's work, Keisha, just work. Mm-hmm. And I'm the Queen of England. Girl, I've known you since college. You only wear burgundy when you want to be noticed. Before Jordana could protest, someone knocked on the bathroom door. Jordana? Chad's voice made her pulse jump. The guests are starting to arrive. I'll be right there, she called back, ending the call quickly. When she emerged, Chad was waiting in the hallway, and his reaction to seeing her was immediate and unmistakable. His eyes widened slightly, traveling over her dress before meeting her gaze. You look, he started, then stopped himself, professional ready. but the way he said professional made it sound like anything but. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her dress self-consciously. "Shall we head to the plaza?" As they walked toward the elevator, Jordana caught their reflection in the polished walls. They looked good together, he in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, she in her elegant burgundy dress, like a couple heading to their own event. The thought should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her stomach flutter with dangerous possibility. And as the elevator doors closed, carrying them toward an evening that would change everything, neither of them could have predicted the conversation that was about to unfold in front of 300 of New York's most influential people. Some words, once spoken, can never be taken back, and some challenges, once issued, change everything. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel had been transformed into a winter wonderland that would have made Elsa herself jealous. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across tables draped in pristine white linens, while Jordana's carefully chosen orchid centerpieces created islands of elegant beauty throughout the space. Silver and white balloon arrangements floated near the ceiling like clouds, and the soft lighting gave everything an almost magical glow. Jordana moved through the space with practiced grace, her burgundy dress a striking contrast against the winter palette. She checked place cards, adjusted centerpieces by millimeters, and coordinated with the staff with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. This was her element, the organized chaos of a high-profile event where every detail mattered and nothing could be left to chance. "Everything looks absolutely stunning, dear," said Mrs. Hartwell, the evening's hostess, as she approached in a glittering silver gown. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell." "I'm glad you're pleased," Jordana replied with a warm smile. "The musicians are ready for your entrance in 10 minutes. As Mrs. Hartwell glided away to greet other guests, Jordana allowed herself a moment of pride. The ballroom was perfect, every element working in harmony to create an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance. She glanced toward the entrance and saw Chad speaking with Senator Richardson, his posture commanding attention even in a room full of powerful people. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, the black fabric emphasizing his broad shoulders and the confident way he carried himself. Several women in the room had already cast appreciative glances his way, and Jordana felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been jealousy. "Jordana!" Melissa appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless with excitement. "This is incredible. You've really created something magical here." "Thank you," Jordana said, distracted as she watched Chad shake hands with the mayor, "though I think the credit goes to the entire team." "Are you kidding? This was all your vision." Melissa followed her gaze and grinned knowingly. "Speaking of visions, our boss looks particularly handsome tonight, doesn't he?" Jordana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hadn't noticed." "Right," Melissa laughed, "and I'm secretly a billionaire. Come on, every woman in this room has noticed Chad Levine tonight." Before Jordana could respond, Jennifer from accounting joined their conversation, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you see how Mrs. Blackthorne was practically throwing herself at him during cocktails? Some women have no shame." "Please," Melissa scoffed, "as if Chad Levine would ever notice someone like that. The man's practically a monk. I swear he's married to his work." "Exactly," Jennifer agreed. "Can you imagine him actually getting involved with someone from the office? He's way too professional for that kind of drama." Jordana found herself listening despite her better judgment, a strange mix of curiosity and discomfort swirling in her chest. "I heard he's never even been seen on a real date," Melissa continued. "Like ever. The man's a mystery wrapped in an expensive suit." "Well, he certainly wouldn't look twice at any of us mere mortals," Jennifer said with a laugh. "We're practically invisible to someone like him." The comment hit closer to home than Jordana cared to admit. She'd spent 3 years feeling invisible in Chad's presence, always professional, always in the background. The thought that others saw her the same way, as someone who could never possibly catch his attention, stung more than she expected. "Of course he wouldn't," Jordana said, forcing a light laugh to hide the sudden tightness in her chest. "Why would a billionaire ever notice someone like me? He'd never even think about touching someone like me." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, carrying undertones of her own insecurities about her place in his world. As soon as she said them, she wished she could take them back. It wasn't like her to be so revealing, so vulnerable in front of colleagues. "Oh, come on," Melissa started to say. "You're being too hard on yourself." "Excuse me, ladies." The deep, familiar voice behind them made Jordana's blood turn to ice. She turned slowly, her heart sinking as she found Chad standing just a few feet away, his blue eyes fixed directly on her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, a sharpness and intensity that made her stomach drop. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? Melissa and Jennifer scattered like leaves in the wind, suddenly remembering urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. Jordana was left alone with Chad, the sounds of the party fading into background noise as he stepped closer. "Miss Barry," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Interesting conversation. Mr. Levine, she started, but the words died in her throat. What could she possibly say? That she was just joking, that she didn't mean it? Both would be lies, and something told her he'd see right through them. Chad moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a challenge. "You seem pretty confident about what I would or wouldn't do," he said, tilting his head slightly as he studied her face. "About who I would or wouldn't touch." The way he said the word touch made Jordana's breath catch. There was something dangerous in his tone, something that made her pulse race with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "I didn't mean," she began, but he cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "Oh, I think you meant exactly what you said." His lips curved into a smile that was equal parts challenging and predatory. "The question is, do you want to bet on it?" The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Jordana stared at him, her mind racing. Was he serious? Was Chad Levine, the man who lived his life by rules and professional boundaries, actually challenging her to some kind of game? "I don't understand," she whispered, though part of her understood perfectly. "It's simple," Chad said, stepping even closer until there was barely a breath of space between them. "You seem so certain that I'd never notice you, never want to touch you. But what if you're wrong?" His hand moved slowly, deliberately, until his fingers were almost touching her wrist. The space between his skin and hers felt electric, charged with possibility and danger. "What if," he continued, his voice dropping to a hypnotic murmur, "I've been noticing you for longer than you think? What if the only thing stopping me from touching you has been this?" He gestured slightly to the formal space around them. "And not this?" His eyes moved over her face with unmistakable intent. Jordana's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Chad," she breathed, using his first name without thinking. "So," he said, his finger finally making contact with her wrist, the lightest possible touch that sent shockwaves through her entire system. "Do you want to bet against me?" Before Jordana could answer, before she could even process what was happening, the evening's program began. The musicians struck up the processional music, and Mrs. Hartwell's entrance commanded everyone's attention. Chad stepped back smoothly, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease, but his eyes never left Jordana's face, and the small smile playing at the corners of his mouth told her that whatever had just happened between them was far from over. "We should take our positions," he said in his normal, controlled voice. "The evening is just beginning." As he walked away to join the receiving line, Jordana remained frozen in place, her wrist still tingling from his touch. She looked around the ballroom, at the elegant decorations, the sophisticated guests, the perfect event she had orchestrated, and realized that none of it mattered anymore, because Chad Levine had just issued a challenge that would change everything, and deep down she already knew her answer. And as the evening's festivities swirled around her, Jordana had no idea that accepting his wager would lead her into a game where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. After the words are spoken and the challenge is made, there's no going back to pretending you don't feel what's burning between you. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of controlled chaos and stolen glances. Jordana moved through her duties like a woman in a trance, coordinating the dinner service, managing the evening's timeline, and ensuring every detail ran smoothly. But beneath her professional exterior, her mind replayed Chad's words over and over. "Do you want to bet on it?" Every time she caught sight of him across the ballroom, charming donors during dinner, delivering his flawless toast to thunderous applause, dancing with Mrs. Hartwell during the honorary first dance, she felt that same electric shock that had coursed through her when his finger touched her wrist. The evening concluded without incident at midnight, guests departing with glowing praise for the event's elegance and execution. As the cleanup crew began their work, Jordana supervised the careful packing of rentals and coordination with vendors. She was exhausted, her feet aching in her heels, but she couldn't shake the restless energy that had been building all evening. "Exceptional work tonight, Ms. Barry," Chad's voice came from behind her as she checked off items on her final inventory list. Most of the guests had departed, leaving only staff and a few lingering VIPs in the ballroom. "Thank you," she replied, not trusting herself to look at him directly. The event exceeded all expectations. Yes, it did. There was something in his tone that made her finally meet his eyes. "Though I think we have some unfinished business to discuss." Before she could respond, Oliver approached with a couple of late-departing guests who wanted to compliment Chad on the evening. Jordana used the interruption to escape to the venue's private office, where she could finally breathe without feeling Chad's intense gaze on her. She kicked off her heels and sank into a chair, her head spinning with exhaustion and confusion. What had happened between them? Was Chad serious about his challenge, or had she completely misread the situation? And more importantly, what did she want his answer to be? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of the catering staff. Instead, Chad stepped into the small office, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. He'd removed his bow tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone, giving him a slightly disheveled look that was somehow more devastating than his usual perfection. "Everyone's gone," he said simply, leaning against the door. The venue manager locked up the ballroom. Jordana felt trapped, acutely aware of how small the office suddenly seemed with both of them in it. "I was just finishing the inventory. I'll be out of your way in a few minutes." "Jordana." The way he said her name made her breath catch. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse race. This wasn't the polished businessman she'd worked with for 3 years. This was something rawer, more dangerous. "About what I said earlier," he began, taking a step closer. "I meant every word. Chad, we can't what?" He moved closer still, until he was standing directly in front of her chair. "Can't acknowledge what's been building between us for months. Can't admit that every professional interaction we've had lately has felt like foreplay." The blunt words made Jordana's cheeks burn. "We work together. There are boundaries." "Boundaries," Chad repeated, crouching down so they were at eye level. "Is that what you were thinking about when you made that comment tonight? About boundaries?" "I was embarrassed," she admitted quietly. "Listening to them talk about how invisible I am to you, how someone like you would never notice someone like me." Chad's expression softened slightly. "And what if I told you that you're the farthest thing from invisible? That I notice every time you bite your lip when you're concentrating, every time you tuck that one curl behind your ear when you're nervous, every time you smile at something you think is funny, but try to hide it." Jordana stared at him, shocked by the specificity of his observations. "You notice all that?" "I notice everything about you," he said quietly. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Before she could answer, he stood and moved to the small window overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan twinkled below them, and Jordana watched the way the glow highlighted the strong line of his jaw. "I have a proposition," he said without turning around. "A proposition?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. 7 days, Chad said, finally facing her again. "Give me 7 days to prove that everything you said tonight was wrong. 7 days to show you that a billionaire can definitely notice someone like you, that he can want to touch you, that he already does." Jordana's mouth went dry. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we explore this, whatever this is between us, without the constraints of office politics and professional boundaries. Away from here, away from work." He paused, studying her face. "I'm suggesting we see what happens when we stop pretending we don't want each other." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Jordana felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, and Chad was asking her to jump. "And after 7 days," she whispered, "after 7 days, if you still think I'd never notice you, never want you, then we go back to being boss and assistant, professional, polite, nothing more." His eyes darkened. "But if I'm right, if I can prove that you're all I think about, that touching you is all I want to do, then we figure out what comes next." Jordana stood on shaking legs, needing to move, to think, to process what he was offering. "Chad, this is crazy. We could both lose our jobs. Your reputation, my reputation," he said with a slight smile, "will survive whatever scandal the New York elite think they can create. And as for our jobs, I own the company, Jordana. The only person who can fire you is me, and I think we can safely say that's not going to happen." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. 3 hours ago she'd been invisible. Now the most powerful man she knew was asking her to spend a week exploring the attraction that had been simmering between them. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Chad moved toward the door. then paused with his hand on the handle. "But Jordana, don't take too long. Some opportunities don't wait forever." After he left, Jordana sank back into the chair, her mind racing. She thought about the way he'd looked at her tonight, the electricity she'd felt when he touched her wrist, the way her name sounded when he said it like a prayer. She thought about Keisha's constant complaints, that she never took risks, never put herself out there. She thought about the woman in the mirror that morning, choosing burgundy because she wanted to be noticed. And she thought about Chad's challenge, 7 days to prove that everything you said tonight was wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "How did the fancy gala go? Meet any interesting men?" Jordana stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "You could say that. Details, I want all the details." Jordana smiled despite herself. If only Keisha knew that the most interesting man at the gala had just offered to turn her entire world upside down. She gathered her things, slipped her heels back on and headed for the exit. As she waited for the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished doors, her burgundy dress slightly wrinkled, her carefully styled hair a bit mussed, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like excitement. The elevator arrived, and as the doors closed, Jordana realized she'd already made her decision. She just needed the courage to tell Chad what it was. And as she rode down to the lobby, she had no idea that accepting his challenge would teach her things about herself and about love that she never knew she was capable of feeling. Sometimes the scariest step is the first one, but it's also the only one that leads to where you truly want to go. Monday morning arrived with the crisp bite of late November in Manhattan. Jordana stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying her makeup with hands that trembled slightly, despite her attempts at composure. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying Chad's proposition over and over until the words had burned themselves into her memory. 7 days to prove that everything you said tonight was wrong. She'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on a fitted black blazer over a soft grey blouse and tailored pants. Professional enough for the office, but with a subtle elegance that made her feel confident. If she was going to have this conversation with Chad, she needed all the confidence she could muster. The weekend had been a torment of indecision. She'd called Keisha Saturday morning, desperately needing someone to talk to, but unable to reveal the full truth. "So let me get this straight," Keisha had said after Jordana offered a carefully edited version of events. "Some mystery man at the gala asked you out, and you're freaking out about whether to say yes." "It's complicated," Jordana had replied, which was the understatement of the century. "Honey, it's only complicated if you make it complicated. Do you like him?" That was the question that had kept her awake all weekend. Did she like Chad? The professional distance she'd maintained for 3 years made it hard to separate her attraction to his power and success from genuine feelings for the man himself. But when she thought about the way he'd looked at her Friday night, the intensity in his voice when he'd listed all the little things he'd noticed about her, yes, she liked him, more than she was comfortable admitting. Now standing in the elevator on her way to the 52nd floor, Jordana felt her resolve wavering. What if she'd misread everything? What if Friday night had been some kind of elaborate test of her professionalism, and showing up ready to accept his proposition would be the end of her career? The elevator doors opened and she stepped into the familiar bustle of Monday morning at Levine Events & Co. Everything looked exactly the same as always. The marble floors gleaming under the morning light, assistants hurrying past with coffee and files, the subtle hum of productivity that marked the beginning of another week. But something felt different. Maybe it was the way Melissa glanced at her with barely concealed curiosity, or the way Oliver nodded at her with what might have been knowing amusement. Or maybe it was just that Jordana herself felt different, like she was walking through her old life wearing new skin. "Morning, Jordana," called Jennifer from accounting as she passed. "How are you feeling after Friday night? You looked a little intense during the gala." "Just focused on making sure everything went smoothly," Jordana replied carefully, but she wondered exactly what Jennifer had observed. Chad's office door was closed when she reached her desk, which wasn't unusual. He often arrived early for conference calls with international clients. Jordana settled into her routine, checking emails and reviewing the day's schedule, but her eyes kept drifting to his door. At exactly 9:30, her phone buzzed with an internal call. "Ms. Barry, could you come to my office, please?" Chad's voice was perfectly professional, giving no hint of their conversation Friday night. Jordana took a steadying breath and knocked on his door. "Come in." Chad was standing behind his desk, looking out at the city skyline. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. For a moment, seeing him in his natural element, powerful, controlled, untouchable, made Jordana wonder if she'd imagined the raw vulnerability she'd seen in him Friday night. "Close the door," he said without turning around. The simple request sent her pulse racing. She closed the door and stood in front of his desk, clasping her hands to keep them from shaking. Chad finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his blue eyes immediately dispelled any doubt that Friday night had been real. "Did you have a good weekend?" "It was enlightening," she replied carefully. Enlightening. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "And did your enlightenment lead to any conclusions?" This was it, the moment of truth. Jordana looked at the man who'd been her boss for 3 years, who she'd admired from a distance, who'd just offered to turn her world upside down. She thought about the woman who'd gone home Friday night, and the woman standing here Monday morning, and realized they weren't the same person. "Yes," she said quietly, "I accept." Chad's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "You accept what exactly? I want to be very clear about what we're agreeing to." Heat rose to her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I accept your 7-day challenge, to prove that everything I said Friday night was wrong. And you understand what that means?" "It means," Jordana said, finding her courage, "that for the next 7 days we explore whatever this is between us, away from the office, away from professional boundaries." Chad moved around his desk, stopping just close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne. "It means I'm going to touch you, Jordana. I'm going to show you exactly how much I notice you, how much I want you, and at the end of 7 days, you're going to admit that you were completely wrong about what a billionaire would or wouldn't do." The blunt words made her breath catch, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "We'll see about that." Chad's smile widened, and for the first time since she'd known him, it was purely predatory. "Yes, we will. Are you free tonight?" "Tonight?" The question caught her off guard. "Day 1 starts now, Jordana, unless you're having second thoughts." She wasn't, but the speed at which things were moving made her head spin. "What did you have in mind?" "Dinner. Somewhere we can talk without interruption." He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Somewhere I can begin proving my point." Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Chad stepped back smoothly as Oliver's voice called from the hallway. "Chad, the Morrison clients are here for the 10 o'clock. "1 moment," Chad called back, then lowered his voice for Jordana alone. 8 o'clock tonight. I'll pick you up. You don't know where I live." Chad's smile was enigmatic. "I'll figure it out. I always do." As Oliver knocked again, Chad returned to his professional demeanor so quickly it was almost dizzying. "That will be all for now, Miss Barry. Please send the Morrison clients in." Jordana nodded and moved toward the door, her legs feeling slightly unsteady. As she reached for the handle, Chad's voice stopped her. "Jordana." She turned back to find him watching her with an expression that made her stomach flutter. "Wear something that makes you feel beautiful. Not professional, beautiful." The request felt deeply intimate, like a secret between them. She nodded and slipped out of his office, nearly colliding with Oliver and the Morrison clients in the hallway. "Are you all right?" Oliver asked, steadying her with a concerned look. "You look a bit flushed." "I'm fine," Jordana replied quickly. "Just need some coffee. Mr. Levine is ready for you." She escaped to her desk, her heart pounding. Around her, the office continued its normal Monday morning rhythm, but Jordana felt like she was inhabiting a different reality. In less than 12 hours, she would be having dinner with Chad, not as his assistant, but as a woman he wanted to prove wrong about everything she thought she knew about desire and attraction. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to tonight. C." Jordana stared at the message, then carefully saved the contact. As she did, she realized that accepting Chad's challenge wasn't just about proving or disproving her comment from Friday night. It was about discovering who she could be when she stopped hiding behind professional boundaries and started embracing the woman who wanted to be noticed, who wanted to be touched, who wanted to be desired. And as the morning dissolved into the busy routine of client calls and event planning, Jordana had no idea that day 1 of Chad's challenge would teach her something she'd never expected, that being wanted by the right person could make her feel more powerful than she'd ever imagined. The first real conversation can be more intimate than any physical touch, until the moment when both happen at once. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jordana heard the gentle knock on her apartment door and felt her stomach flip with nervous anticipation. She'd spent the better part of 2 hours getting ready, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a deep navy dress that hugged her curves without being too obvious. The fabric was soft and flowing, making her feel feminine and confident. Beautiful, just as Chad had requested. Her small apartment in Brooklyn Heights suddenly felt too cramped, too personal for Chad to see. The exposed brick walls, vintage furniture she'd collected over the years, and photos of family and friends felt like they revealed too much about who she was outside the polished professional facade he knew. She opened the door and felt her breath catch. Chad stood in the hallway looking devastatingly handsome, in dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater. More casual than she'd ever seen him, but somehow even more attractive. The expensive clothes emphasized his athletic build, and without the armor of his business suits, he looked more approachable, more human. "You look incredible," he said, his eyes moving over her dress with unmistakable appreciation. "That color is perfect on you." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "You look different." "Good different," Chad smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "I thought you might like to see me without the CEO costume. May I come in for a moment?" Jordana stepped aside, acutely aware of how his presence seemed to fill her small living space. She watched as his eyes took in her home, the bookshelf filled with romance novels and event planning guides, the soft throws draped over her couch, the small herb garden thriving on her windowsill. "This is very you," he said, running his fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "Warm, welcoming, beautiful." The compliment made her heart flutter. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's perfect." Chad turned to face her, and the sincerity in his expression made her chest tighten. "Ready for dinner? I thought we'd go somewhere we could actually talk." "Where are we going?" she asked, grabbing her purse and a light jacket. "So you'll see," Chad said with a mysterious smile. "Trust me." As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Jordana became acutely aware of the space between them. Chad stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but he didn't touch her. The tension was almost unbearable, like a string pulled taut and ready to snap. "Nervous?" he asked softly, noticing her fidgeting with her bracelet. "A little," she admitted. "This is new for me." "Good," Chad said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate tone that made her pulse race. "I want this to be unlike anything you've experienced before." Outside, instead of the sleek black car she'd expected, Chad led her to a motorcycle parked at the curb. Jordana stopped short, staring at the powerful machine. "You ride a motorcycle?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Chad grinned, pulling 2 helmets from the storage compartment. "You sound shocked." "What did you think I drove?" "I don't know, a town car, something with a driver." "I do have those," Chad admitted, handing her a helmet. "But tonight isn't about what Chad Levine, the CEO, does. Tonight is about what Chad the man wants to do. And what I want is to feel you holding on to me while we ride through the city." The honest admission made Jordana's cheeks burn. The thought of wrapping her arms around Chad, of pressing close to him for the entire ride, sent heat coursing through her body. "I've never been on a motorcycle," she confessed. "Another first," Chad said with satisfaction. "Just hold tight and trust me." As Chad started the engine, the powerful rumble vibrated through Jordana's entire body. When he gestured for her to climb on behind him, she hesitated for only a moment before settling onto the seat and tentatively placing her hands on his waist. "Closer," Chad called over the engine noise. "I won't let anything happen to you." Jordana pressed closer, her chest against his back, her arms wrapping fully around his waist. She could feel the warmth of his body through the thin sweater, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the strength in his shoulders and torso. As they pulled into traffic, she held on tighter, and she could have sworn she felt Chad's muscles tense in response to her touch. The ride through Manhattan was exhilarating. They wove through the evening traffic, past the glittering lights of the city, the wind whipping around them despite the protection of their helmets. Jordana found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, trusting Chad completely as he navigated the busy streets with confident ease. When they finally stopped outside a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, Jordana was breathless with adrenaline and the intoxicating sensation of having been pressed against Chad for 20 minutes. "How was that?" Chad asked, as he helped her off the bike, his hands lingering on her waist. "Incredible," she admitted, pulling off her helmet and shaking out her hair. "I can't believe you ride motorcycles." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Chad said, his eyes following the movement of her fingers as she attempted to fix her wind-blown hair. "That's what tonight is for." The restaurant was intimate and dimly lit, with only a dozen tables and the kind of authentic atmosphere that couldn't be bought or manufactured. Chad had somehow secured a corner table that offered privacy despite the bustling energy of the small space. "This doesn't seem like your usual scene," Jordana observed as they were seated. "What's my usual scene?" Chad asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know. 5-star restaurants with celebrity chefs and wine lists that cost more than my rent?" Chad laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You really think I'm that pretentious?" "I think you're that successful," Jordana corrected. "There's a difference." Their waiter appeared with menus and recommendations, and Chad ordered a bottle of wine that Jordana was sure cost more than she usually spent on groceries in a month. But as they settled into conversation, she found herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know," Chad said after their appetizers arrived. "Something real." Jordana considered the question while sipping her wine. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was little. Elementary school. I used to line up my dolls and teach them math and reading. What changed? Reality," Jordana said with a wry smile. "Teaching doesn't pay enough to help support your family when your mom gets sick and can't work for 6 months." Chad's expression grew serious. "Is your mother all right now?" "She's fine, fully recovered. But those 6 months taught me the value of a steady paycheck and good health insurance." Jordana took another sip of wine, feeling more relaxed than she had all day. "What about you? Did you always want to build an empire?" "Actually," Chad said, leaning back in his chair, "I wanted to be a chef." Jordana nearly choked on her wine. "You're joking." "I'm completely serious. I spent summers working in my uncle's restaurant in Boston. Loved the creativity, the precision, the way you could make someone's entire day better with the perfect meal." "What happened?" Chad's expression grew more guarded. "My father made it clear that Levines don't work in service industries. We build companies. We don't cook for other people." The bitterness in his voice surprised Jordana. "Do you regret it?" "Some days," Chad admitted, "but I'm good at what I do, and it's allowed me to build something that's entirely mine." As the evening progressed, Jordana discovered layers to Chad she'd never suspected. He was funny, telling stories about disastrous early events that had her laughing until her sides hurt. He was thoughtful, asking questions about her dreams and opinions that showed he was genuinely interested in her thoughts. And he was surprisingly vulnerable, sharing glimpses of the loneliness that came with success and the pressure of always being the person everyone else depended on. "Can I ask you something?" Jordana said as they shared a decadent chocolate dessert. "Anything." "Why me? You could have any woman in New York. Why are you here with your assistant trying to prove some point about a comment I made when I was embarrassed?" Chad set down his fork and leaned forward, his eyes becoming intense again. "Because," he said quietly, "in 3 years of working together, you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen someone worth challenging. Everyone else sees the money, the power, the image. You see the man." Before Jordana could respond, Chad reached across the table and took her hand. The contact was gentle but electric, sending shockwaves up her arm. "And because," he continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "when you made that comment Friday night, all I could think about was proving to you exactly how wrong you were, how much I've wanted to touch you, to kiss you, to show you that you're not invisible to me. You never have been." Jordana stared at their joined hands, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Chad, day one isn't over yet," he said softly, "and I'm just getting started proving my point." And as his fingers intertwined with hers across the candlelit table, Jordana realized that everything she thought she knew about desire was about to be completely rewritten. Sometimes the most dangerous place to be is in the space between wanting something and having it, especially when that space keeps getting smaller. The next 3 days passed in a blur of stolen moments and carefully orchestrated encounters that left Jordana feeling like she was living in 2 different worlds. During business hours, she and Chad maintained their professional facade with an expertise that bordered on artistry. But outside the office, he was systematically dismantling every assumption she'd ever made about herself and about him. Tuesday had been lunch at a small cafe in Central Park, where Chad had surprised her by ordering in fluent French and admitting he'd spent a year studying in Lyon after college. They'd talked about books and travel and dreams deferred, and when he'd walked her back to the office, his hand had brushed hers 3 times, each touch deliberate, electric, impossible to ignore. Wednesday evening, he'd taken her to a jazz club in Harlem, where the music was sultry and the lighting was dim. They'd sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of his thigh pressed against hers, and when a particularly seductive song had come on, Chad had leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Dance with me." On the small, crowded dance floor, pressed against his chest with his arms around her waist, Jordana had felt something shift between them. The careful distance they'd been maintaining began to crumble as they moved together to the hypnotic rhythm. When the song ended, Chad had looked down at her with such intensity that she'd forgotten how to breathe. "You're beautiful when you let yourself feel the music," he'd said softly, his fingers tracing along her jaw. "You should do it more often." Now it was Thursday evening, and Jordana stood in her apartment getting ready for whatever Chad had planned next. She'd started looking forward to these evenings with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. Each day he revealed new layers of himself, while simultaneously showing her sides of herself she hadn't known existed. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Dress casual. We're doing something different tonight. See, casual." Jordana smiled as she selected dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft cream sweater that she knew complemented her skin tone. Over the past few days, she'd noticed herself making choices based on what she thought Chad might like, and the realization both excited and unsettled her. At 8 o'clock, she opened her door to find Chad holding a paper bag and wearing jeans and a leather jacket that made him look younger, more relaxed. "What's in the bag?" she asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "Dinner," Chad replied with a grin. "I thought tonight we'd stay in." Jordana felt a flutter of nerves. Having Chad in her apartment for a quick pickup was one thing, but spending an entire evening in her personal space felt infinitely more intimate. "Who cooked?" she asked as she let him in. "I bought," Chad corrected, unpacking containers from her favorite Thai restaurant, "but I remembered you mentioning you loved pad Thai, so I thought we'd have a night in. Sometimes the best conversations happen when you're not performing for an audience." As they settled on her couch with the takeout containers spread on her coffee table, Jordana was struck by how natural this felt. Chad looked perfectly at home in her small living room, his long legs stretched out, his jacket discarded on the back of her chair. "This is nice," she said, curling her legs underneath her. "Different from the places you've been taking me. Do you mind the change of pace?" "Not at all. I love those restaurants, but this feels more real." Chad smiled. "That was the point. I wanted to see you in your element, completely relaxed." As they ate, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Chad told her about growing up with the pressure of family expectations, about the loneliness of never knowing if people liked him for himself or his money. Jordana shared stories about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her close relationship with her sister and her mother's strength during difficult times. "Can I ask you something personal?" Chad said during a lull in the conversation. "Haven't all your questions been personal? This one's different." Chad set down his chopsticks and turned to face her fully. "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught Jordana off guard. "Once," she said softly. "In college. His name was Michael. I thought we'd get married, have the whole fairy tale." "What happened?" Jordana was quiet for a moment, surprised by how much the memory still stung. "He said I was too ambitious, too focused on my career. He wanted someone who would be content to support his dreams instead of chasing her own." Chad's expression darkened. He was an idiot. Maybe. Or maybe I was naive to think someone could love me and support my ambitions at the same time. "Jordana." Chad moved closer to her on the couch, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "Anyone who can't see your strength, your intelligence, your incredible capability as assets rather than threats, doesn't deserve you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. "What about you?" she asked. "Ever been in love?" Chad was quiet for so long that Jordana thought he might not answer. "I thought so once," he finally said. "Her name was Caroline. We were together for 2 years. She seemed to understand the demands of my work, the lifestyle." "What happened?" "I found out she was selling stories about our relationship to tabloids. Apparently, dating a billionaire was lucrative, even when the relationship was private." Chad's jaw tightened. "She said she loved me, but what she really loved was the idea of me, the status, the money." "I'm sorry," Jordana said softly, understanding now why he was so guarded. "It taught me to be careful about who I let close, to question people's motives." Chad looked at her intently. "But you've never asked me for anything, Jordana. In 3 years, you've never tried to leverage our working relationship for personal gain. You've never even asked for a raise. I'm well compensated for my work. That's not the point." Chad reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle touch sending shivers down her spine. "The point is that you see me as a person, not a bank account. Do you know how rare that is?" The honesty in his voice made Jordana's heart ache. "Chad, I need you to understand something," he said, his hand cupping her cheek. "This week isn't just about proving you wrong about what I'd want to do. It's about showing you who I am when I'm not performing the role of Chad Levine, CEO. It's about discovering who we could be together. Jordana leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, Chad was watching her with an expression so tender, it took her breath away. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking," Jordana said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that you're making it very hard to remember why this is supposed to be temporary." Chad's thumb traced along her cheekbone. "Who says it has to be?" Before she could answer, Chad leaned closer, his intention clear in his eyes. Jordana's breath caught as the space between them diminished to nothing. She could feel the warmth of his breath on her lips, could see the way his gaze dropped to her mouth. "Jordana," he whispered, her name a question and a plea. Instead of answering with words, she closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and absolutely electric. Chad's response was immediate, his hand threading through her hair as he deepened the kiss with a passion that had been building for days. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Chad rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since Monday," he admitted. "Just since Monday," Jordana teased, her heart still racing. Chad smiled, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Longer, much longer." As they sat there in the soft light of her living room, wrapped in each other's arms, Jordana realized that somewhere between day 1 and day 4, this had stopped being about proving a point. This had become about two people discovering they could be everything they'd never dared to hope for. And as Chad held her close, neither of them wanted to think about what would happen when their 7 days were over, because both of them were starting to believe that 7 days might not be nearly enough. When you've crossed the line between wanting and having, there's no going back to pretending the line never existed. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November sunshine that made Manhattan look like it was posing for a postcard. Jordana stood at her office window, watching people hurry along the sidewalk below, their breath visible in small puffs of steam. She'd been at her desk for 20 minutes, but her mind was still replaying every moment of the previous evening. The kiss had changed everything. What started as Chad's challenge to prove her wrong had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated, something real, vulnerable, and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. "You're glowing this morning," Melissa observed as she passed Jordana's desk with a stack of vendor contracts. "Good night?" "Just well rested," Jordana replied, hoping her expression didn't betray the butterflies that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. Chad's office door had been closed when she arrived, and she could hear him on a conference call with clients in London. His voice carried that familiar tone of controlled authority, and Jordana found herself remembering how different that same voice had sounded when he whispered her name the night before. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Good morning, beautiful. Lunch today?" "See." The casual endearment made her pulse quicken. She typed back, "Don't we have the Peterson presentation at noon? Move to Monday. Say yes." Before she could respond, Oliver appeared at her desk, looking harried. "Jordana, thank God you're here. We have a situation with the Harrison wedding tomorrow. The bride is threatening to call off the entire event because the florist delivered pink roses instead of blush." "That's easily fixed," Jordana said, immediately shifting into crisis management mode. "I'll call our backup florist and have the correct roses delivered within 2 hours. You're a lifesaver. Chad's been in meetings all morning, and Mrs. Harrison is intense." As Oliver hurried away, Jordana dove into damage control, making calls and coordinating vendors with the efficiency that had made her invaluable to Chad's company. She was so absorbed in solving the floral crisis that she didn't notice Chad emerge from his office until he was standing directly in front of her desk. "Problem solved?" he asked, and something in his tone made her look up from her phone. Their eyes met, and Jordana felt that familiar electric shock. Chad looked impeccable as always in a navy suit and silver tie, but there was something different in his expression, a warmth, an intimacy that hadn't been there before last night. "Crisis averted," she reported, acutely aware that several colleagues were within earshot. "Mrs. Harrison will have her perfect blush roses by 11. "Excellent." Chad's formal tone didn't match the way his eyes were studying her face. "Ms. Barry, could I see you in my office? I'd like to discuss the timeline for next week's events." It was a perfectly reasonable request that no one would question, but Jordana's heart began racing as she followed him into his office. Chad closed the door, and immediately the professional facade dropped. "I've been thinking about you all morning," he said quietly, moving closer to her. "About last night." "Chad, we're at work," Jordana whispered, glancing toward the glass wall that faced the main office. The blinds were closed, but she was acutely aware of how thin the barriers were between their private moment and the professional world outside. "I know," he said, stopping just close enough that she could catch the scent of his cologne. "But I needed to see you, to make sure last night was real." "It was real," Jordana admitted softly. "Maybe too real." Chad's expression grew serious. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. "Chad," Oliver's voice called, "sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Harrison is on line 1. She wants to speak with you personally." Chad closed his eyes briefly, then called back, "Tell her I'll call her back in 5 minutes. She says it's urgent. Something about the venue setup." "Of course it is," Chad muttered under his breath, then louder, "Transfer the call to my office." As his phone rang, Chad looked at Jordana with regret. "We'll continue this conversation later. Lunch?" "Yes," she said, then slipped out of his office as he answered the call with his most diplomatic tone. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of vendor calls, client emails, and last-minute adjustments for the weekend's events. But underneath the professional efficiency, Jordana was acutely aware of a new tension in the office. Every time she and Chad interacted, even about mundane business matters, there was an undercurrent of awareness that made her skin tingle. At exactly noon, Chad appeared at her desk. "Ready for lunch? Where are we going?" she asked, gathering her purse. "Somewhere we can talk without interruption," Chad said, and something in his tone made her stomach flutter with anticipation and anxiety. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a quiet corner booth at a small bistro in Soho, far enough from their usual business district that they were unlikely to encounter colleagues. Chad had been unusually quiet during the cab ride, and Jordana found herself studying his profile, trying to read his mood. "You're being very mysterious," she said as they settled into their seats. "I'm trying to figure out how to say something without sounding completely insane," Chad admitted, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with something. "Just say it," Jordana encouraged. "Whatever it is." Chad looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. "I want to call off the bet." Jordana felt her stomach drop. "What?" "Not because I'm losing," Chad said quickly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Because I've already won, and continuing to frame this as some kind of game feels wrong." "I don't understand." "Jordana," Chad said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "what's happening between us isn't about proving a point anymore. It stopped being about that the moment I realized I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Jordana felt her world tilt off its axis. "Chad, I know it's crazy," he continued. "I know we've only been doing this for 5 days, but the truth is, I've been feeling this way for months, maybe longer. The bet was just an excuse to explore what I was too much of a coward to pursue honestly." Jordana stared at him, her heart pounding. "You're in love with me?" "Completely," Chad said without hesitation. "And I hope, you're starting to feel the same way." Before Jordana could respond, her phone rang loudly in the quiet restaurant. She glanced at the screen and saw Keisha's name. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "Keisha never calls during work hours unless it's important." "Hey, girl." Keisha's voice was excited when Jordana answered. "I have huge news. Remember my cousin Denzel in LA? He just offered me a job at his marketing firm, great salary, amazing benefits, and I'd be working with entertainment clients." "That's wonderful," Jordana said, though her mind was still reeling from Chad's confession. "When would you start?" "That's the thing. He needs an answer by Monday, and if I take it, I'd have to move next month. I know it's sudden, but this is the opportunity I've been waiting for." Jordana felt a pang of sadness at the thought of her best friend moving across the country, but she forced enthusiasm into her voice. "You have to take it, Keisha. This is your dream." After she hung up, Chad was watching her with concern. "Everything okay?" "My best friend just got offered her dream job in Los Angeles," Jordana said, then realized how the timing struck her. Everything in her life was changing at once. Her relationship with Chad, her best friend moving away, her entire sense of who she was and what she wanted. "And that's upsetting you?" "It's not upsetting, it's just a lot. Everything's changing so fast." Jordana looked at Chad, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "Chad, what you just said, I know it's a lot to process," Chad said gently. "I'm not asking you to say it back. I'm just asking you to let me prove that this is real, that what we have is worth exploring without the artificial timeline." "And then what?" Jordana asked. "You're Chad Levine, I'm your assistant. How does this work in the real world?" "We figure it out," Chad said simply. "Together, if you want to." Jordana looked at this man who had turned her carefully ordered world upside down in the span of a week. A man who'd shown her sides of herself she didn't know existed, who'd made her feel desired and valued and beautiful. A man who was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his universe. "I need time to think," she said finally. Chad nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need." But as they sat in the quiet restaurant, both of them knowing that everything between them had just changed again, Jordana wondered if time was really what she needed, or if what she really needed was the courage to trust that love could be worth the risk. And as the afternoon stretched ahead of them, both of them realized that some decisions can't be postponed forever, and some feelings are too big to be contained by the boundaries of a simple bet. Sometimes the hardest person to convince that you deserve love is yourself, especially when everything feels too good to be true. Saturday evening found Jordana curled up on her couch in her pajamas, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands as she stared out at the twinkling lights of Brooklyn Heights. She'd spent the entire day in a fog of confusion, replaying Chad's confession over and over until the words had lost all meaning. "I'm falling in love with you." The memory sent both warmth and panic coursing through her. How had everything become so complicated so quickly? A week ago she'd been content with her quiet, predictable life. Now she felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, with Chad asking her to jump while promising he'd catch her. Her phone had been buzzing intermittently all day with texts from Chad, each one more concerned than the last. "Are you okay? You seemed shaken after lunch. I know I dropped a lot on you. We can talk when you're ready. Just want to make sure you're all right." She hadn't responded to any of them, unsure what to say. How could she explain that his confession had triggered every insecurity she'd spent years trying to suppress? That a lifetime of feeling like she had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition had left her unable to believe that someone like Chad could genuinely want someone like her. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Jordana glanced at the clock, 8:30 on a Saturday night. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Jordana, I know you're in there," Keisha's voice called through the door. "I can see your lights on and your car's downstairs." Reluctantly, Jordana opened the door to find her best friend holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression she recognized as Keisha's intervention face. "You look terrible," Keisha announced, pushing past her into the apartment. "And don't say you're fine because I got 3 texts from you today that were just random emoji. That's your distress signal." "I'm not in distress," Jordana protested weakly. "Uh-huh." Keisha opened the wine and poured 2 generous glasses. "Spill. What's got you hiding in your apartment like a hermit?" Jordana sank back onto her couch, accepting the wine gratefully. For a moment, she considered deflecting, but the weight of keeping everything secret for the past week suddenly felt unbearable. "I'm in love with my boss," she said quietly. Keisha nearly choked on her wine. "Excuse me, your boss, the Ice King billionaire? His name is Chad, and he's not an Ice King. He's..." Jordana struggled to find words. "He's wonderful, and funny, and vulnerable, and he told me yesterday that he's falling in love with me too. And this is bad news because it's crazy," Jordana exclaimed, jumping up to pace around her small living room. "Because men like Chad Levine don't fall in love with women like me. Because this whole thing started as some ridiculous bet, and now I don't know what's real anymore." "Slow down," Keisha said, setting down her wine. "Start from the beginning. What bet?" For the next hour, Jordana told Keisha everything, from the overheard conversation at the gala, to Chad's 7-day challenge, to their first kiss, to his confession the day before. Keisha listened without interruption, her expressions ranging from amazement to concern to outright glee. "Girl," Keisha said when Jordana finally finished, "you've been living in a romance novel for the past week and you're complaining?" "I'm not complaining, I'm being realistic. This isn't a fairy tale, Keisha. This is real life, and in real life, billionaires don't fall for their assistants and live happily ever after." "Says who?" Keisha challenged. "And why are you so convinced that you're not worthy of love from someone successful?" The question hit Jordana like a physical blow. "I didn't say I wasn't worthy." "Yes, you did. You've been saying it this entire conversation. Men like Chad don't fall for women like me. This is too good to be true. You're so busy convincing yourself that you don't deserve this, that you're going to sabotage the best thing that's ever happened to you." Jordana felt tears prick at her eyes. What if he changes his mind? What if he realizes I'm not worth the complications? What if he doesn't? Keisha interrupted gently. What if he's telling the truth, and you're about to throw away something amazing because you're scared? Before Jordana could respond, her phone rang. Chad's name flashed on the screen, and both women stared at it. "Answer it," Keisha urged. "I can't. I don't know what to say to him." "Say hello. Start there." With trembling fingers, Jordana accepted the call. "Hello? Jordana?" Chad's voice was warm with relief. "I was starting to worry. Are you all right?" "I'm processing," she said honestly. "I know yesterday was a lot. I should have eased into it instead of just blurting out my feelings like that." "Chad, it's not that, it's—" Jordana glanced at Keisha, who made encouraging gestures. "Can we talk? In person?" "Of course. I can be there in 20 minutes. "Actually," Jordana said, surprising herself, "can I come to you? I think I need to see where you live, see more of your world." There was a pause. "Are you sure? My apartment can be a bit overwhelming." "I'm sure." After Chad gave her his address, Jordana hung up and looked at Keisha, who was grinning. "I'm proud of you," Keisha said. "You're scared, but you're doing it anyway. That's courage." "What if I'm making a mistake? Then you'll survive it." "But Jordana, what if you're not? What if this is exactly what you've been waiting for your whole life and you almost missed it because you were too afraid to believe you deserved it?" An hour later, Jordana stood in the lobby of Chad's building on the Upper East Side, staring up at marble columns and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her annual salary. The doorman had called up to announce her, and she was waiting for Chad to come down and escort her up. When the elevator doors opened and Chad stepped out, her breath caught. He was wearing jeans and a simple black sweater, but even in casual clothes, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who owned the world. When he saw her, though, his expression softened into something that looked almost vulnerable. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would. I know, but after yesterday, I wasn't sure." As they rode the elevator to the penthouse, Jordana tried to calm her nerves. She was about to see how Chad really lived, to step fully into his world and understand the magnitude of the difference between their lives. The elevator opened directly into Chad's apartment, and Jordana's jaw dropped. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. The space was enormous, elegantly furnished with pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was perfect, pristine, intimidating. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, though the words felt inadequate. "It's lonely," Chad replied, watching her reaction carefully. "I bought it because it was supposed to be impressive, but I've never felt at home here, not the way I felt at your apartment." Jordana turned to look at him, surprised by the admission. "Really? Really?" Chad moved closer to her, his eyes searching her face. "Jordana, I know this is overwhelming. I know my world can seem intimidating, but none of it matters if you're not in it." "Chad, let me say this," he interrupted gently. "I've spent my entire adult life building walls, keeping people at a distance because it was safer, because letting someone close meant risking being hurt again. But you—" He reached out to cup her face in his hands. "You make me want to tear down every wall I've ever built." Jordana felt tears threatening again. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Chad admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of taking this risk." As they stood in his beautiful empty apartment, with the lights of the city spread out below them, Jordana realized that Keisha was right. She was about to sabotage something beautiful because she couldn't believe she deserved it. And in that moment, standing in Chad's arms with her heart pounding and her future hanging in the balance, Jordana knew she had to make a choice that would change everything. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting your fears for. They stood facing each other in the middle of Chad's pristine living room, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled like a galaxy of possibilities, but all Jordana could focus on was the man in front of her and the choice that would define the rest of her life. "Talk to me," Chad said softly, his hands still framing her face. "Tell me what you're thinking." Jordana closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I'm thinking that a week ago my biggest worry was whether the centerpieces would arrive on time. Now I'm standing in a penthouse that probably costs more than I'll make in my lifetime, and the most powerful man I know is telling me he loves me. And how does that make you feel?" "Terrified," she whispered, "like I'm in someone else's life." Chad's thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheekbones. "This is your life, Jordana. Our life, if you want it to be." She opened her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness. It made her chest ache. "Chad, I need you to understand something. I've spent my entire life being careful, being practical. I've never been the girl who gets the fairy tale ending. Why not? The simple question broke something open inside her. Because girls like me don't get men like you. Because every time I've let myself believe in something beautiful, it's been taken away. Because, her voice cracked, because I'm terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize I'm not worth all the complications. Chad was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Can I tell you something that might sound crazy? Jordana nodded, not trusting her voice. Every morning for the past 3 years, I've looked forward to coming to work not because of the deals I might close or the success I might achieve, but because I knew I'd see you. I'd watch you handle impossible clients with grace, solve problems that would make other people panic, and do it all while making everyone around you feel valued and important. He paused, his hand sliding down to take hers. And every night, I'd go home to this perfect empty apartment and wonder what it would be like to have someone to share it with. Someone who would laugh at my terrible jokes, who would tell me when I'm being an arrogant ass, who would make this place feel like home instead of just an expensive showcase. Jordana felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Chad, I'm not done, he said gently, because here's the thing that might sound crazy. I don't want you to fit into my world, Jordana. I want us to build a world together. One where your warmth balances my intensity, where your groundedness keeps me from disappearing into my own ambition, where your laugh fills up all the empty spaces I didn't even realize existed. But what about work? What about people talking, saying I only got ahead because we're together? Chad's expression grew fierce. Anyone who knows you knows that your success comes from your talent, not from who you're dating. And anyone who doesn't know you doesn't matter. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Chad interrupted, then immediately softened his tone. Okay, maybe it's not simple, but it's worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for. Jordana pulled away from him, needing space to think. She walked to the windows, staring out at the city below. What if this is just infatuation? What if we're caught up in the excitement of something forbidden, and when the novelty wears off? Look at me, Chad said from behind her. She turned to find him watching her, with an expression so intense it stole her breath. This isn't infatuation, he said with quiet certainty. This is me realizing that everything I thought I wanted, the power, the success, the recognition, means nothing if I don't have someone to share it with. This is me understanding that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life. It's about finding someone who makes you want to build a completely new life together. And you think I'm that person? I know you are. Chad moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. The question is, do you trust me enough to find out what we could be together? Jordana stared at him, this man who had turned her carefully ordered world upside down in the span of 7 days. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, the overheard conversation that had started it all, the bet that had given them an excuse to explore their attraction, the gradual revelation that what existed between them was so much deeper than either had expected. I'm still scared, she admitted. Good, Chad said, surprising her. I'd be worried if you weren't. This is scary. Love is scary. But you know what's scarier? What? Spending the rest of our lives wondering what might have been if we'd been brave enough to try. Chad stepped closer, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope and fear warring in his expression. Jordana, I can't promise you that this will be easy. I can't promise that people won't talk, or that there won't be challenges we can't even imagine yet. But I can promise you that I will never stop fighting for us. I will never stop choosing you every single day for as long as you'll let me. The words hit her like a revelation. All her life she'd been waiting for someone to choose her, really choose her, not settle for her or use her as a placeholder until something better came along. And here was Chad offering exactly that. The bet, she said suddenly. You said you wanted to prove that a billionaire would touch me, would want me. Chad smiled, understanding immediately where she was going. And? You were right, Jordana said, stepping closer to him. You were right about everything. You do notice me. You do want me. You did touch me. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. But you know what you proved that I didn't expect. What? That I'm worth choosing, that I'm worth fighting for, that I'm worth love. Her voice broke on the last word. And maybe I'm brave enough to choose you back. Chad's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his features. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Does that mean? It means yes, Jordana whispered. Yes to you, yes to us, yes to being brave enough to build something beautiful together. even if it scares me to death. Chad's response was immediate and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her with a passion that spoke of relief and joy and promises for the future. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Not the idea of you, not the fantasy of you, but you." Jordana Barry, the woman who makes terrible coffee jokes and solves impossible problems and has the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard. "I love you too," Jordana replied, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly right on her lips. Chad Levine, the man who rides motorcycles and tells stories that make me laugh until my sides hurt and looks at me like I'm the most important thing in his world. As they held each other in the soft light of his apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, but focused only on each other, Jordana realized that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the scariest. Sometimes the leap that terrifies you most is the one that leads you exactly where you're supposed to be. And as the city lights twinkled below them like stars, both of them knew that their real story, the one that would last far beyond any 7-day challenge, was just beginning. Love isn't measured in days or weeks. It's measured in all the small moments that add up to a lifetime of choosing each other. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly renovated office space, casting warm golden light across the mahogany conference table where Jordana sat reviewing vendor contracts for their biggest client event yet. The nameplate on her desk now read, Jordana Barry, Senior Partner, and the office bore her personal touches, plants that actually thrived, family photos that made her smile, and yes, a proper coffee machine that had become legendary among their staff. She looked up from her paperwork as familiar footsteps approached, and couldn't help but smile as Chad appeared in her doorway, holding 2 cups of perfectly brewed coffee. Even after all this time, her heart still did that little flutter when she saw him, though now it was accompanied by the comfortable warmth of deep, abiding love, rather than nervous anticipation. "Good morning, partner," Chad said, setting 1 cup on her desk and leaning down to kiss her forehead, a gesture so natural and easy that it was hard to remember when they'd ever had to hide their affection. "Good morning yourself," Jordana replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How did the call with the Morrison account go?" "Beautifully. They want us to handle their daughter's wedding next spring." Chad settled into the chair across from her desk, a ritual they'd developed over the months. "Apparently our reputation for creating magical, authentic celebrations has reached legendary status." Jordana laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I love that we're known for authentic celebrations. Remember when you thought romance was just good business?" "I was an idiot," Chad said without hesitation. "Turns out romance is the best business when it's real." The transformation in both their lives had been remarkable. When they'd gone public with their relationship, carefully, professionally, with transparency to all clients and staff, the reaction had been overwhelmingly positive. Jordana's natural talent for understanding what people truly wanted, combined with Chad's business acumen and resources, had elevated their company to new heights. More importantly, it had elevated them as individuals. "Speaking of authentic," Chad said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and setting it casually on her desk, "I have something for you." Jordana nearly choked on her coffee. "Chad Levine, are you proposing to me in our office at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday?" "Actually," Chad said with that familiar mischievous smile that still made her stomach flip, "I'm asking you to marry me in our office at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. There's a difference." "Is there now?" Jordana set down her coffee with trembling hands, staring at the small box that represented everything she'd never dared to dream of. "The difference is that proposing implies a grand gesture, probably in some fancy restaurant with champagne and violins. Asking you to marry me is just this, us. Coffee and morning meetings, and the rest of our lives starting with an ordinary Tuesday that becomes extraordinary because we decide to spend forever together." Jordana opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, not enormous or ostentatious, but elegant and timeless, with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw tiny rainbows across her desk. "It's perfect," she whispered, then looked up at Chad with tears in her eyes. "But I have one question. Anything. Are you asking because you love me, or because you want to win another bet?" Chad laughed, standing up and coming around her desk to kneel beside her chair. "I'm asking because 18 months ago you taught me the difference between wanting someone and loving them, because you turn every ordinary moment into something magical, because you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves your extraordinary heart." He took her left hand gently. And because when I imagine my future, all the successes, all the adventures, all the quiet Sunday mornings and crazy work days, you're in every single one of those pictures. Yes, Jordana said, before he could even finish the question. Yes to forever. Yes to ordinary Tuesdays. Yes to all of it. As Chad slipped the ring onto her finger, Jordana thought about the woman who had sat in this same building 18 months ago, convinced she was invisible, certain that men like Chad would never notice women like her. That woman could never have imagined this moment, not just the proposal, but the confidence, the partnership, the way love had transformed her understanding of her own worth. There's something else, Chad said, standing and pulling her up with him. I know we've talked about expanding the business, maybe opening a second location. Chad, we literally just got engaged 30 seconds ago, and you're already talking business. It's related, I promise. What would you say to expanding to Los Angeles? Jordana's eyes widened. Los Angeles, that's where Keisha moved. I know, and I've been thinking, she's been out there for over a year now, making connections in the entertainment industry. She mentioned wanting to start her own events company when we talked last month. You want to go into business with Keisha? I want to give my fiancée a chance to work with her best friend while we build something amazing on the West Coast. Barry Levine Events by Coastal Division. Jordana stared at him, overwhelmed by how perfectly he understood her, how he'd thought of every detail that would make her happy. You've been planning this. For months, Chad admitted. I wanted to give you everything. The proposal, the ring, the business expansion, the chance to be close to Keisha again. I wanted to prove that marrying me doesn't mean giving up anything you want. It means gaining everything you didn't know you could have. Before Jordana could respond, there was a knock on her office door. Oliver appeared, followed by most of their staff, all holding champagne glasses and wearing expectant expressions. Did she say yes? Melissa called out, barely containing her excitement. She said yes, Chad announced, and the office erupted in cheers and applause. As their colleagues toasted their engagement and future plans, Jordana found herself thinking about that night 18 months ago when Chad had issued his challenge. He'd promised to prove that a billionaire would notice her, would want to touch her, would choose her, but what he'd actually proven was so much more profound. He'd proven that love could transform not just two people, but everyone around them. Their relationship had brought out the best in both of them, had created a partnership that was stronger than either could have been alone. He'd proven that when two people truly see each other, really see each other, magic becomes possible. Later that evening, after the champagne had been finished and the last congratulations offered, Jordana and Chad found themselves back where it all began, in the small employee kitchen where they'd shared that first meaningful conversation over coffee. Any regrets? Chad asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she rinsed out their cups. Just one, Jordana said, leaning back against his chest. What's that? I regret that it took us 3 years to have this conversation. Imagine how much sooner we could have been this happy. Chad nuzzled her neck, pressing a soft kiss just below her ear. I don't regret the timing. I think we needed those 3 years to become the people who were ready for this kind of love. Jordana turned in his arms, studying his face. The same handsome features that had intimidated her 18 months ago, now beloved and familiar and home. Can I tell you a secret? She said. Always. I still can't quite believe this is real sometimes. That you chose me, that we built this, that I get to wake up every day loving you and being loved by you. Chad's expression grew tender. Want to know something that might surprise you? What? I feel exactly the same way. Every morning when I wake up and remember that you're mine, that we're building a life together, that I get to love you for the rest of my life, it still feels like the most incredible gift I've ever been given. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other in the soft light of the city evening, and Jordana marveled at how perfectly ordinary and absolutely extraordinary it felt at the same time. So, she said with a mischievous smile, what's our next bet going to be? Chad laughed, the sound filling the small space with warmth and joy. How about this? I bet that 50 years from now, we'll still be standing in kitchens making terrible coffee jokes and falling more in love every day. That's a bet I'm willing to take, Jordana said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Because you know what? What? You've already won. 6 months later, at their wedding, as Jordana walked down the aisle of the small chapel in Napa Valley, surrounded by family and friends and the golden glow of sunset, she caught Chad's eye and saw in his expression everything they'd built together, the love, the partnership, the absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. And when the officiant asked if Chad would take Jordana to be his wife, His answer was immediate and sure. I already have. I chose her 18 months ago, and I choose her again today, and I'll choose her every day for the rest of my life. The touch that had started as a challenge had become the foundation of everything beautiful they would build together. Final reflection. Some people say that love at first sight is a fairy tale, that real relationships are built slowly over time through shared experiences and mutual respect. Others believe that when you know, that the right person can change your entire world in an instant. The truth, as Jordana and Chad discovered, is that both can be true. Sometimes love is the slow burn of friendship, turning into something deeper. Sometimes it's the lightning strike of recognition across a crowded room. But the very best love, the kind that lasts, the kind that transforms, the kind that makes you brave enough to bet everything on another person, that love is both the lightning strike and the slow burn. It's the instant recognition that this person could change everything, followed by the daily choice to let them do exactly that. What did this story teach you about taking chances on love, even when it scares you? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.